Alexander Hayes leaned back in his leather chair, gazing out the massive window that offered a panoramic view of New York City's skyline. It was the typical afternoon at Hayes Industries headquarters, endless meetings, phone calls, and financial reports. Just as he was about to dive into another deal, his phone rang. It was Maria, his secretary. "Mr. Hayes, there's a call for you," she announced with a hint of urgency in her voice. "It's from a community center in Brooklyn. They're hosting a charity event this weekend, and they're inviting you as a guest of honor." Alexander frowned, leaning forward. "Charity? I don't do charity, Maria." Maria hesitated for a moment before responding. "I know, sir, but this event is different. They work with children from difficult backgrounds, many of whom don't have families. They believe your presence could bring attention to their cause." Alexander's jaw tightened. "They want a photo opportunity, don't they?" Maria was silent for a moment before replying carefully. "I think it's more about inspiring the kids, sir." He was about to dismiss it when a voice from the past echoed in his mind. "Daddy, you always said helping people was the right thing to do." It was a memory of his daughter, Emma, who had disappeared 10 years ago. The mere thought of her was enough to pierce through his armor, awakening a long-buried guilt that never truly left. Maria spoke again, softer this time. "Perhaps it's worth considering, Mr. Hayes. I know you have your reasons, but maybe this could be meaningful." Alexander's stern expression softened slightly, and after a heavy pause, he gave a reluctant nod. "Fine, I'll go, but only for an hour." Maria let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you, sir. I'll confirm your attendance." As the call ended, Alexander was left alone with his thoughts. His eyes drifted to an old photo on his desk. A young Emma, beaming with joy, holding up a drawing she'd made for him. It was a scene from their last happy memory together. Despite his cold demeanor and ruthless business tactics, there were still cracks in his facade, cracks that Emma's absence had carved deep within him. When Saturday came, Alexander found himself in the crowded yet lively community center. He wore his best suit, clearly out of place among the casual attire of volunteers and children. His eyes scanned the room, filled with small tables covered in crayons, construction paper, and unfinished drawings. The noise was a blend of children's laughter and volunteers' efforts to keep the event organized. Suddenly, a cheerful voice interrupted his observations. "Mr. Hayes, welcome. Thank you for joining us." It was Janet, the center's coordinator, a woman in her early 40s with a warm smile. Alexander nodded curtly, unsure how to respond. "I don't usually do events like this," he admitted. Janet's eyes softened. "I know. That's why it's even more meaningful that you came. These kids don't have much, but they have a lot of hope. It makes a difference when someone like you shows up." Alexander shifted uncomfortably, feeling out of his element. He followed Janet's lead, shaking hands, exchanging forced smiles, and even pausing for a few photographs with the children. As he moved from table to table, he noticed the drawings, mostly simple depictions of families, animals, and dreams of a better life. But one sketch in particular caught his attention. It was of a sapphire necklace, strikingly detailed and hauntingly familiar. His heart skipped a beat. It looked exactly like the one he had given to Emma on her 10th birthday. He felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine, unsure if it was shock, fear, or a bizarre sense of déjà vu. "Who drew this?" Alexander asked, his voice a mix of confusion and urgency. Janet followed his gaze. "Oh, that's drawn by a new girl here. She's very talented, but a bit withdrawn." Alexander's expression darkened, as if a storm was brewing behind his eyes. "I'd like to meet her." Janet hesitated for a moment. "Of course, but she's a bit shy. Her name is Lily." Alexander's gaze remained fixed on the drawing, the sapphire necklace seeming to call out to him like a ghost from his past. As Alexander continued to stare at the drawing, the air around him seemed to grow colder. The intricate details of the sapphire necklace, its oval-shaped gemstone surrounded by tiny diamonds, were unmistakable. His mind flashed back to the day he had given it to Emma. It had been her 10th birthday, a surprise gift that made her eyes light up like stars. He could still hear her giggle as she fastened it around her neck and hugged him with uncontainable joy. Trying to keep his composure, Alexander turned to Janet. Where is Lily now? Janet looked around the room, scanning the small heads and bustling energy. She's over there, by the corner. She likes to sit alone, she said, pointing to a quiet figure hunched over a table, her back to them. Alexander's gaze followed Janet's gesture. There, sitting slightly apart from the other children, was a small girl, no older than 9 or 10. Her brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, her shoulders hunched as she concentrated on another drawing. There was something oddly familiar about her posture, a sense of déjà vu that unsettled him even more. He slowly approached the table, unsure of how to start the conversation. The girl didn't look up. She seemed completely absorbed in her work, her pencil moving swiftly across the paper. "Hello," Alexander said, his voice softer than usual. Lily glanced up, her dark eyes wary. She didn't respond immediately, as if weighing whether it was safe to engage. "I saw your drawing," he continued, keeping his tone gentle. "The necklace, it's beautiful. Where did you learn to draw like that?" Lily shrugged slightly, her eyes dropping back to the paper. "I don't know. I just remember it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander felt a strange, twisting sensation in his chest. "You remember it? From where?" Lily hesitated, then spoke with a hint of uncertainty. "I think I saw it in a dream, or maybe someone I knew wore it. I can't really remember." Alexander's mind raced. This was impossible. The necklace had been a one-of-a-kind piece, custom-made for Emma. How could a girl in a community center be drawing it with such precision? The questions threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to stay composed. "You draw very well," he said, trying to sound encouraging. "Is there someone who taught you? A parent, maybe?" Lily's expression changed slightly, a shadow of pain crossing her face. "No," she answered quickly. "I don't have parents." Alexander's heart tightened, a strange mix of sympathy and anxiety surging through him. He tried to keep his voice steady. "I see. Do you remember anything about your family? Or where you came from?" Lily shook her head slowly, her eyes distant. "I came here a few months ago. They told me I was found near a park, alone. I don't remember much before that." Alexander struggled to process this information. His instinct screamed that there was more to the story, but he knew pushing her too hard could make her retreat. He glanced at her drawing once more. "Do you like drawing? It seems to make you happy." For the first time, Lily's face softened a little, a faint smile appearing. "Yes, it does. It's the one thing I remember doing before I got here." Alexander's mind was racing. Could Lily be connected to Emma in some way? The idea seemed absurd, yet the uncanny familiarity of the necklace and the girl's age left him with a gnawing suspicion. Just then, Janet approached. "Everything okay here?" Alexander nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on Lily. "Yes, just getting to know one of the talented artists here." Janet smiled warmly. "Lily's a special one, for sure. She's been through a lot, but she's resilient." Alexander looked at Janet, trying to keep his expression neutral. "Do you know anything about her past? Where she came from before arriving here?" Janet's smile faded slightly. "Not much, I'm afraid. She was found alone, and there wasn't any record of family or relatives. We're still trying to piece things together." Alexander's jaw tightened. "No records at all?" Janet shook her head, a trace of sadness in her eyes. "It's not uncommon, unfortunately. Sometimes, children like Lily just slip through the cracks." Alexander turned back to Lily, who had resumed drawing. He felt an overwhelming urge to protect her, to uncover the truth that seemed to be hiding just beneath the surface. Before he could say anything more, Lily looked up and spoke. "You remind me of someone." Alexander's breath caught. "Who?" The girl's expression was distant, as if trying to retrieve a memory buried deep within her mind. "I don't know, but I feel like I've seen you before. Maybe in one of my dreams." Alexander's mind reeled. Could this child be connected to the painful chapter of his past he had never truly closed? The possibility seemed too surreal, yet there was something about Lily that he couldn't shake off. As the event came to an end, Alexander found himself unable to leave. He stood by the exit, watching Lily from a distance as she gathered her drawings. He felt a heavy weight on his chest, a growing sense of urgency to find answers. As he walked out of the community center, the crisp evening air hit his face, but it did little to clear his racing thoughts. The sapphire necklace, Lily's mysterious past, and the uncanny sense of familiarity all swirled together, leaving him with one undeniable realization. This was only the beginning. The next morning, Alexander couldn't shake the thoughts of Lily from his mind. His routine, usually defined by strict schedules and business deals, felt strangely hollow. His mind was consumed by the possibility that this mysterious girl with no past could be connected to Emma. The sapphire necklace haunted his thoughts, and he found himself staring at the photo on his desk for what seemed like hours. By mid-afternoon, Alexander made a decision. He picked up the phone and dialed Maria's extension. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," he ordered abruptly. "All of them, sir?" Maria asked, her surprise evident. "Yes. I'm going back to the community center," he said, his voice firm. Without hesitation, Alexander grabbed his coat and headed out. His driver, Charles, opened the back door of the sleek black car, but Alexander waved him off. "I'll walk from here," he said. The community center wasn't far, and the brisk air might help clear his mind, though deep down he knew it wouldn't. The questions lingered like dark clouds. When he arrived at the center, he was greeted with some surprise. Janet, who was in the middle of organizing supplies, looked up. "Mr. Hayes, you're back. Didn't expect to see you so soon." "I'd like to spend more time with the children," Alexander said, trying to keep his tone casual. "Especially Lily." Janet studied him curiously but nodded. "Of course. She's in the art room, as usual." He made his way toward the art room, a sense of nervous anticipation building inside him. When he reached the door, he paused, observing Lily from a distance. She sat alone at a table, her head down, completely immersed in a new drawing. Alexander took a deep breath and approached slowly. "Hello, Lily," he said, keeping his voice gentle. Lily glanced up, her expression cautious but not unfriendly. "Hi. May I sit with you?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from her. Lily nodded, and Alexander sat down, unsure of how to begin. He glanced at the drawing in front of her. This time, it was of a house surrounded by trees. It looked strangely familiar, and he felt an unexpected jolt of recognition. "That's a nice house," he said carefully. "Is it somewhere you've been before?" Lily's pencil paused. "I think so. I don't know where it is, but I see it in my dreams sometimes." Alexander's heart quickened. He had to tread lightly. Dreams can be powerful. "Do you often dream about this house?" Lily nodded slowly. "Yes, and there's a woman there, too. She's very nice, but I never see her face. She always tells me to be brave." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. Could it be Emma? He tried to keep his composure. "Do you talk to this woman in your dreams?" "Sometimes," Lily replied, her eyes distant. "She says she misses me, but she can't come back yet." Alexander's heart ached. He leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but intense. "Lily, I want to help you. I want to know more about your past. Maybe it could help you remember things." Lily's eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of suspicion flickering in them. "Why do you want to help me?" The question caught Alexander off guard. How could he explain the strange, almost desperate connection he felt? Instead, he settled on a simple truth. "Because I've lost someone very dear to me, too. Someone who might have been around your age now." Lily's expression softened a bit, but she still seemed unsure. "Who did you lose?" Alexander swallowed hard, feeling the familiar pain welling up inside him. "My daughter," he confessed. "She disappeared a long time ago, and I've never stopped searching for answers." Lily's eyes widened, but she said nothing, her small hands fidgeting with the edges of her paper. Alexander could see she was trying to process this information. "I'm not asking you to remember everything right now," he added gently. "But maybe, if we spend more time together, things could become clearer for both of us." Lily looked up at him, her gaze a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Do you really think you can find your daughter?" The question was direct and cut deep, but Alexander nodded firmly. "I have to try, just like I want to help you find out more about yourself." For the first time, Lily's eyes seemed to soften completely. There was a glimmer of something. Hope, perhaps, or at least a willingness to trust. "Okay," she said quietly. "We can try." Feeling a surge of emotion, Alexander nodded. "Thank you, Lily." As the day went on, Alexander stayed by her side, talking to her in between her drawings and watching as she occasionally opened up with small details about her dreams, memories, and feelings of loneliness. At one point, he noticed her struggling with a specific detail in her drawing, a small pendant she was trying to replicate on paper. It wasn't the sapphire necklace this time, but a tiny heart-shaped locket. "Is that important?" Alexander asked gently. Lily nodded, her expression suddenly serious. "Yes, very. I remember holding it tight when I was scared." Alexander felt a sudden urgency. "Where's this locket now? Do you have it with you?" Lily's face fell, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I lost it a long time ago. I think someone took it." Alexander's mind raced. "Do you remember who?" Lily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "No, but I know it's important. It's the only thing I had left from someone who cared about me." Alexander felt a deep, almost unbearable sadness. He wanted to reach across the table and comfort her, but he knew it would take time to earn her trust fully. Instead, he spoke with quiet determination. "We'll find it, Lily. We'll find out everything." As they parted ways that evening, Alexander made a silent promise to himself. He would not only find out the truth about Lily, but also confront the painful mystery that had haunted him for years. Emma's disappearance, the sapphire necklace, and now this child with fragmented memories. Everything felt connected in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Walking out of the center, Alexander felt the weight of the past pressing down on him more than ever. But this time there was a flicker of hope mixed in with the pain. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was clear he wasn't walking it alone anymore. The following week, Alexander's obsession with finding answers intensified. His office desk, once cluttered with financial reports and market analyses, was now buried under photographs, files, and notes about Lily. There were few details to work with. No records of her family, no clear story of how she ended up at the community center. But Alexander refused to be deterred. He picked up his phone, calling Maria. "I need a private investigator," he said, his voice steady but urgent. The best one. Within an hour, he was in a meeting with Richard Stein, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving the most complex cases. Stein, a rugged man in his 50s, listened intently as Alexander described the situation. "You're telling me this girl drew a necklace that matches one from your daughter's past?" Stein asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "Exactly," Alexander replied, handing over a picture of Emma wearing the sapphire necklace. "And she mentioned a locket, too. I believe it's significant." Stein studied the photograph, then met Alexander's gaze. "I'll start by digging into the center's records, see if there's any trace of where she might have come from. But I need you to be prepared for the unexpected. Cases like these tend to uncover things people aren't ready for." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I don't care what it takes, Stein. I need answers." The next few days were filled with tense anticipation. Alexander made excuses to visit the community center, always under the guise of charitable interest. He kept close to Lily, observing her quietly, looking for more clues. Each day, Lily seemed to grow more comfortable around him, offering small bits of conversation and even the occasional smile. One afternoon, as the children gathered for a story session, Alexander found himself talking to Janet again. "Lily seems to be opening up a bit," he noted. Janet nodded, her expression thoughtful. "She's still very guarded, though. It's hard to get her to talk about anything personal." Alexander tried to sound casual, though his voice was tense. "Do you think she's hiding something?" Janet hesitated before answering. "It's not that she's hiding something, exactly. It's more like she's protecting herself. I think there's a lot she's trying to forget." Alexander felt a pang of empathy mixed with frustration. "What do you mean by that?" Janet sighed. "Sometimes children who've experienced trauma block out memories to protect themselves. It's a survival mechanism. It takes time and trust for them to feel safe enough to remember." Alexander's heart sank. He knew the journey ahead would be long, but he couldn't let go now. His instincts told him that Lily held the key to the truth about Emma. The next morning, Stein called with a lead. "I found something that might interest you," he said. Lily was brought to the center by a social worker named Sandra Matthews. "I tracked her down, and she mentioned that Lily was found wandering near a park, looking lost and disoriented." Alexander felt a jolt of adrenaline. "Which park?" "Prospect Park," Stein replied. "But there's more." Matthews said that Lily had a small pendant around her neck when she was found. A heart-shaped locket. Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. "What happened to the locket?" "Sandra said it was taken into custody by the police as part of standard procedure," Stein explained. "But it seems to have disappeared during the transfer between departments." Alexander's mind raced. The locket was the most tangible link to Lily's past, and possibly to Emma's disappearance. "I want that locket found, Stein. Whatever it takes." Stein's voice was firm. "I'm on it." Later that day, Alexander returned to the community center, his mind still reeling from Stein's findings. As he stepped inside, he noticed Lily sitting alone, staring at a piece of paper with a look of deep concentration. He approached cautiously. "What are you drawing today, Lily?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Lily looked up, her expression conflicted. She held up the drawing for Alexander to see. It was the same heart-shaped locket, this time with more detail. He felt a chill run down his spine. "Do you remember this locket?" he asked gently. Lily's eyes were distant, as if trying to pull a memory from the fog of her mind. "I remember holding it tight," she said quietly. "I think someone told me to never let it go." "Who told you that?" Alexander pressed, his voice barely a whisper. Lily hesitated, her small hands trembling slightly. "I don't know, but I think it was someone who loved me." Alexander's heart ached. He wanted to believe that this was the breakthrough he had been waiting for, but he knew he couldn't push her too hard. "It's okay," he said softly. "We'll figure it out together." As they continued to talk, Alexander noticed a group of unfamiliar men near the entrance of the center, watching him intently. They were dressed in plain clothes, but their demeanor was unsettling. He felt a surge of protectiveness for Lily, his instincts on high alert. He turned to Janet, who was speaking to a volunteer nearby. "Janet, who are those men by the door?" he asked quietly. Janet glanced over, her expression turning wary. "I'm not sure. They haven't introduced themselves, but they've been here before, asking questions about the children." A knot of unease settled in Alexander's stomach. "What kind of questions?" "Mostly about the children's backgrounds," Janet explained, "but they seem particularly interested in Lily." "I thought it was odd." Alexander's instincts screamed that this wasn't a coincidence. He had dealt with plenty of shady characters in the business world, and these men had the same unsettling aura. He couldn't afford to let them get too close to Lily, not without knowing their intentions. The men lingered for a while longer before leaving without speaking to anyone. Alexander felt a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. He knew he needed to protect Lily, but the mystery seemed to be deepening with each passing day. That night, back in his office, Alexander sat in the dark, staring at the photos of Emma and the drawings Lily had made. There were too many parallels, too many questions that needed answers. The missing locket, the familiar necklace, and now the strange men at the center. It all felt connected, but the pieces didn't fit together yet. He picked up his phone, calling Stein once more. "I need more security around the community center," he said bluntly. "And I need those men identified." Stein's response was swift. "I'll handle it. But Alexander, you need to be careful. If someone else is looking for Lily, it might not be for the same reasons as you." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I know, but I won't let anyone hurt her." As he hung up the phone, Alexander knew one thing for certain. He was prepared to face whatever dangers lay ahead. Lily's safety and the answers she might hold had become more important than anything else. The stakes were higher now, but so was his determination. He would not fail her the way he felt he had failed Emma. That evening, Alexander stood on the balcony of his penthouse, staring out at the sprawling city below. The lights flickered like stars, but there was no beauty in them tonight. His mind was consumed by the revelation of the missing locket and the unsettling presence of those men at the community center. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass. but it did little to calm his nerves. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Stein. "Meet me at the office. I have information." Within minutes, Alexander was out the door and heading toward Stein's office, a discreet building in a quieter part of Manhattan. Stein greeted him at the door, his expression serious. "I traced the locket's disappearance," Stein said, leading Alexander into a small, cluttered room. "It turns out it was logged in by the police, but someone signed it out before it was officially processed." "Who?" Alexander demanded, his voice low and urgent. Stein's face was grim. The signature was from a detective named Robert Mills. "He was part of the missing persons unit 10 years ago. The same time your daughter disappeared." Alexander felt his heart tighten. "What's his connection to Lily?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Stein replied. "But Mills retired 5 years ago under mysterious circumstances. There were rumors of corruption, missing evidence, and ties to the underworld." The revelation hit Alexander like a punch. Could Mills have been involved in Emma's disappearance? And if so, was Lily somehow connected to whatever twisted scheme had taken his daughter? Stein continued, "I've also been looking into the men at the community center. They're not local law enforcement. They're private operatives, probably hired by someone with deep pockets." Alexander's eyes darkened. "Can you find out who they're working for?" "I'm on it," Stein assured him. "But it'll take time." Alexander's mind raced with the implications. He had always suspected there were darker forces at play in Emma's disappearance, but now it felt like he was finally catching a glimpse of the shadows that had haunted him for a decade. "I want full surveillance on the center," Alexander instructed, "and keep a close eye on Lily. If anyone tries to take her, I want to know about it immediately." Stein nodded. "Understood." The next day, Alexander returned to the community center, feeling a mix of dread and determination. As he stepped inside, he noticed Lily sitting quietly by a window, staring out into the busy street beyond. He approached her, trying to keep his voice gentle. "Hi, Lily. How are you today?" Lily glanced up, a faint smile appearing on her face. "I'm okay." Alexander sat beside her, his gaze shifting between her and the street outside. "I was thinking, maybe we could take a walk in the park later. Would you like that?" Lily's eyes brightened a bit. "Yes, I'd like that." As they made their way to Prospect Park, Alexander found himself feeling strangely at ease. He hadn't felt this connected to anyone since Emma, and the thought was both comforting and terrifying. As they walked along the winding paths, Lily spoke more than usual, describing things she noticed: flowers, birds, and even the occasional squirrel darting across the grass. At one point, they reached a small clearing, and Lily suddenly stopped. Her expression became serious as she looked around. "I think I've been here before," she said quietly. Alexander felt a surge of hope. "What do you remember?" Lily closed her eyes, her small face scrunched up in concentration. "There were people, and I was scared. Someone told me to hide." "Who told you that?" Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know, but I think it was a woman. She was kind, but I couldn't see her face." Alexander's heart ached as he watched her struggle with the memory. He knelt down to her level, his voice firm yet gentle. "It's okay, Lily. You don't have to remember everything now. But if you do, I'm here to help." Lily nodded, wiping away her tears. "Thank you." As they continued walking, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced around, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the sense of unease lingered, like an itch he couldn't scratch. Later that evening, as they returned to the community center, Alexander noticed Janet approaching them with a concerned expression. "Mr. Hayes, can I speak with you for a moment?" He nodded, motioning for Lily to stay nearby. "What is it?" Janet's voice was low, barely audible. "I received a strange phone call today. A man asked a lot of questions about Lily, her routine, who visits her, and even what she talks about." Alexander felt a surge of anger. "Did he say who he was?" "No," Janet replied, her eyes wide with worry. "But he was very persistent." Alexander's face hardened. "If he calls again, I want to know immediately. And keep an eye on Lily. I have a feeling this isn't over." That night, back in his penthouse, Alexander paced the room, his mind replaying the events of the day. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was closing in, someone who might know more about Emma's disappearance than he did. The stakes were growing higher, and the danger was becoming more tangible. Just as he was about to call Stein for an update, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but something told him to answer. "Alexander Hayes," he said, his voice cautious. "Mr. Hayes," a rough voice replied. "I have information about your daughter." Alexander's heart stopped. "Who is this?" "That's not important," the voice continued, "but I think we can help each other. Meet me tomorrow at the old warehouse on Pier 22. Alone." The line went dead before Alexander could respond. He stared at the phone in disbelief, a mix of hope and dread surging through him. It could be a trap, or it could be the break he had been waiting for. As he stood there, a cold resolve settled over him. He would go to the meeting, no matter the risks. He couldn't let this lead slip away, not when he was so close to finding the truth. With a final glance at the photograph of Emma on his desk, Alexander made a silent vow. Whatever it took, he would uncover the secrets of the past, even if it meant facing the darkness head-on. The next morning, a cold, overcast sky hung over Manhattan, mirroring the ominous feeling in Alexander's chest. The words of the mysterious caller echoed in his mind. Pier 22. Alone. He knew it could be a trap, but he had no choice. Emma's memory demanded it. Lily's uncertain fate demanded it. Alexander arrived at Pier 22 just before noon. The area was desolate, surrounded by decaying warehouses, rusted shipping containers, and the salty scent of the nearby East River. His footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement, adding to the eerie atmosphere. As he approached the old warehouse, he felt a wave of anxiety. The place was quiet, too quiet. He reached the entrance, a heavy metal door slightly ajar, and pushed it open cautiously. The interior was dimly lit, dust swirling in the beams of faint light that penetrated the broken windows. "Mr. Hayes," a gruff voice called from the shadows. Alexander spun around, his eyes narrowing as a man stepped into the light. He was tall, with unkempt hair, a worn leather jacket, and a face marked by years of hard living. It was Robert Mills, the disgraced detective from Stein's investigation. "Mills," Alexander said, his voice low and filled with tension. "You have information about my daughter." Mills smirked, his eyes cold. "Straight to the point. Huh? I figured you'd be desperate by now." Alexander clenched his fists, struggling to maintain control. "What do you know about Emma?" Mills reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. "This," he said, tossing it toward Alexander. "It's all I've got left from the case." Alexander caught the envelope and tore it open. Inside were two items: a faded photograph of Emma, looking younger than he remembered, and a single page from an old police report. It detailed an anonymous tip about a child matching Emma's description scene with a woman near Prospect Park, the same park where Lily was found. "Why didn't I see this report before?" Alexander demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and anguish. Mills shrugged, his expression devoid of guilt. "It got buried. Too many people had their hands in the case, and some of them had interests that didn't align with finding your daughter." "What do you mean by that?" Alexander pressed, taking a step closer. "Emma's disappearance wasn't random," Mills admitted, his voice surprisingly candid. "She was taken because someone wanted leverage against you. Something to make you comply in a deal gone wrong." Alexander's heart pounded. "Who?" Mills looked away, a shadow of regret crossing his face. "A man named Victor Caldwell. He's powerful, dangerous, and has connections that run deep. I was forced to cover up parts of the investigation." "Caldwell?" Alexander repeated, the name like a dagger to his mind. Victor Caldwell was a rival from his early days in business, an ambitious and ruthless man who had tried to sabotage Alexander's empire more than once. "Emma was a pawn in a much bigger game," Mills continued. "Caldwell saw her as a way to bring you down." Alexander felt a sickening wave of realization. He had been so consumed with business and success that he had never imagined his daughter could have become collateral damage. "Is she alive?" Alexander asked, his voice breaking for the first time. Mills's gaze hardened. "I don't know. but I have reason to believe she might be. The locket Lily had. It belonged to Emma, didn't it? Alexander's legs almost gave out beneath him. Yes, he whispered.
It was hers.
Mills nodded. Then there's hope. The fact that it ended up with Lily means there's a connection, one we need to trace. Alexander's mind raced. If Caldwell is behind this, he won't stop until he gets what he wants. And now that I'm getting closer, he could try to silence me. Or worse, harm Lily. Mills's expression turned grim. You're right. Caldwell doesn't leave loose ends. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Alexander instinctively moved toward cover, his senses on high alert. 3 men appeared at the far end of the room, armed and clearly not there for a friendly chat. Looks like you were followed, Mills muttered. Alexander's mind raced. He had come prepared for the possibility of danger. He pulled a small handgun from his coat, his grip steady despite the fear coursing through him. Can I count on you? He asked Mills. Mills gave a half-smile, his own weapon appearing from inside his jacket. I may be a dirty cop, but I'm not heartless. The men approached rapidly, spreading out to corner Alexander and Mills. The leader, a burly figure with a scar across his cheek, sneered. Mr. Hayes, you're in over your head. Caldwell doesn't want you digging anymore. Alexander's eyes blazed with fury. Tell Caldwell I'm not stopping until I find Emma. The man's response was a cold laugh. You'll be lucky to leave here alive. Without warning, the gunfight erupted. Alexander's instincts kicked in, and he fired quickly, taking cover behind a stack of crates. Mills provided backup, his shots precise and lethal. The warehouse was filled with the deafening sound of gunfire, ricochets, and shouts. Alexander's focus was unrelenting, his mind locked on one thing. He needed to survive, for Emma and for Lily. The chaos seemed to stretch on forever, but after what felt like an eternity, the last of Caldwell's men fell. Breathing heavily, Alexander turned to Mills. We need to get out of here. Caldwell won't stop. Mills nodded, his expression serious. But now you know the truth. It's your move, Hayes. As they made their way out of the warehouse, Alexander felt a strange mix of relief and renewed urgency. He finally had a name, a target for his rage and desperation. But the truth had only brought more questions, and the danger was greater than ever. Back at the community center later that evening, Alexander found himself drawn to Lily. She was in her usual spot, drawing quietly. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, and Alexander felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness. Did you find what you were looking for? Lily asked, her voice innocent but curious. Alexander knelt beside her, his voice gentle but filled with resolve. Not yet, but I'm getting closer. And I promise you, I won't let anything happen to you. Lily's eyes, filled with a mix of fear and trust, met his. Do you think we'll find her? Alexander's voice was steady, but his eyes were damp with unshed tears. Yes, Lily, we will find her. As he watched Lily return to her drawing, Alexander felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for Emma anymore. He was fighting for Lily, for the child caught in the crossfire of a battle she never chose. And he was ready to face Caldwell, no matter the cost. The past was no longer just a painful memory. It was alive, breathing, and demanding justice. And Alexander Hayes would stop at nothing to bring it to light. The following days were a mix of tense planning and fragile hope. With each passing hour, Alexander's determination to protect Lily grew stronger. But he knew that for Lily to trust him fully, he needed to break through the wall she had built around herself, a wall likely formed by years of fear and loss. One morning, Alexander arrived at the community center with a plan. He carried a small sketchbook and a set of colored pencils, knowing that drawing was Lily's favorite activity. As he approached her usual corner, he found her sitting alone, lost in concentration over a half-finished drawing of a small bird perched on a branch. Hey, Lily, Alexander greeted, keeping his tone light. Mind if I join you? Lily looked up, her eyes cautious but not rejecting his presence. Okay, she said quietly. Alexander sat beside her, placing the sketchbook and pencils on the table. I thought maybe we could draw together today. What do you think? Lily's gaze shifted to the new supplies. Her curiosity piqued. Are those for me? Yes, Alexander replied with a smile. I thought you might like them. Lily hesitated, then reached for the pencils, her small fingers testing their weight. Thank you, she murmured, a hint of a smile appearing on her lips. They began drawing in silence, the atmosphere surprisingly comfortable. Alexander sketched simple shapes, trying to match Lily's light strokes. After a while, he noticed Lily glancing at his work, a faint giggle escaping her. You're not very good at this, she teased, her voice soft but playful. Alexander chuckled, feeling a rare sense of warmth. You're right. I'm much better at business meetings than drawing birds. Lily's expression softened, and she seemed to let her guard down a little more. Maybe I can teach you, she offered shyly. Alexander's heart lifted. I'd like that. As they continued to draw, Lily started sharing small details about herself, nothing significant, but enough to give Alexander a glimpse of the world she inhabited. She talked about her favorite colors, blue, like the sapphire necklace, her dreams of flying someday, like the birds I draw, and her fear of the dark. You're brave, Alexander said suddenly, breaking the silence. Lily looked puzzled. Why do you say that? Because you've been through so much, and you're still here, drawing beautiful things, he replied sincerely. That takes courage. Lily's eyes dropped, a mix of vulnerability and uncertainty washing over her. I'm not brave. I get scared all the time. Everyone gets scared, Alexander admitted. Even grown-ups. Lily seemed surprised. Even you? Yes, even me, Alexander said, his voice softening. I've been scared for a long time, actually. What scares you? Lily asked, her gaze intent. Alexander hesitated, feeling the weight of the truth. Losing someone I love, he confessed. Lily's expression changed, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. Me too. The moment was brief but significant, a small step toward breaking the barriers between them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Alexander hope that he could build a real connection with Lily. Over the next few days, Alexander continued to visit regularly, trying different ways to bond with her. He brought books about birds, simple puzzles, and even took her out for ice cream one afternoon. It was during these small outings that Lily began to show signs of genuine happiness. A rare smile here, a laugh there. But beneath the surface, Alexander sensed that Lily's trust was still fragile. Every time he asked about her past or tried to dig deeper into her memories, she became distant, retreating into a shell of silence. Alexander knew he had to be patient, but his desperation to protect her and to find out more about Emma's fate was hard to contain. One evening, as they walked back to the center after a visit to the nearby park, Lily suddenly spoke. Why do you care so much about me? The question hit Alexander like a bolt of lightning. He stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. Because I see a lot of myself in you, he answered honestly. I know what it's like to feel lost, and I don't want you to go through that alone. Lily's eyes searched his, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. I never had a real family, she said quietly. You have one now, Alexander replied, his voice filled with determination. Even if it takes time for you to believe it. Lily looked down, her expression a mix of hope and fear. What if you leave too? Alexander felt a deep ache in his chest. I won't leave, Lily. I promise. Lily didn't respond, but the doubt in her eyes was clear. The promise he had made was one she had likely heard before, from adults who had failed to keep it. Back at the community center, as they were saying goodbye, Alexander knelt to Lily's eye level. I know it's hard to trust me, he said gently, but I want you to know that I mean it when I say I'm here for you. Lily's face was expressionless, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Okay, she whispered, barely audible. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to Alexander. He knew he was making progress, but he also knew that the real battle was yet to come. Protecting Lily was becoming more than a mission. It was a matter of the heart. That night, as Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, his phone rang. It was Stein. I've got news, Stein said, his voice serious. Caldwell's men are making moves. They know you're getting close, and they're not happy about it. Alexander felt a surge of anger. What are they planning? Not sure yet. But you need to be prepared, Stein warned. They're not going to let you walk away with Lily that easily. Alexander's jaw tightened. I won't back down, Stein. Not now. As he hung up the phone, Alexander knew that the road ahead would be treacherous. The closer he got to the truth, the greater the danger for both him and Lily. But he was prepared to fight, with everything he had. In the dim light of his office, Alexander reached for the framed photo of Emma once more. I'm doing this for you, he whispered. And for Lily. I won't fail again. The battle lines were drawn. The stakes had never been higher. And Alexander was ready to face whatever came next, because this time, he wasn't just fighting for the past. He was fighting for the future, too. As days passed, the bond between Alexander and Lily grew stronger, but so did the danger. The threat of Caldwell's men loomed over them like a dark cloud, ever-present and suffocating. Stein's warnings replayed in Alexander's mind, and he increased security around the community center without drawing too much attention. The stakes were rising, and the sense of urgency pressed on him like a weight he couldn't shake. Alexander also knew that to truly protect Lily, he had to confront Caldwell directly. The powerful man had been a shadow over his life for too long, lurking behind Emma's disappearance and now, perhaps, behind Lily's mysterious past. But before he could act, he needed more information. Something to draw Caldwell out of the darkness and into the open. One rainy evening, Alexander found himself back at the center, watching Lily as she played quietly with a small puzzle in the corner. She looked up and caught his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and lingering doubt. Are you okay? Lily asked, her voice gentle. Alexander managed a small smile. I'm fine. Just thinking about how to keep you safe. Lily's expression turned serious. Why are those men watching us? The question startled Alexander. What men? The ones across the street, Lily said, pointing discreetly toward the window. I see them sometimes. They don't talk to anyone, but they watch. Alexander's heart sank. He had hoped to shield Lily from the threats surrounding her, but it seemed she was more observant than he realized. He leaned closer, his voice low. Don't worry about them, okay? They won't hurt you. I promise. Lily nodded, but the fear in her eyes lingered. I just don't want to lose you, too. The words hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. He reached out and gently took her hand. You won't lose me, Lily. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. The next morning, Stein called with an urgent update. We've got a lead, he said, his voice tense. One of Caldwell's associates has agreed to talk. He's willing to meet, but there's a catch. He wants to meet you alone. Alexander felt a surge of adrenaline. Where? A bar in Brooklyn, Stein replied. It's a rough place, but he says it's the only place he feels safe. Alexander agreed to the meeting, feeling both anticipation and dread. He arrived at the bar later that evening, his senses heightened by the dim, smoky atmosphere. The place was filled with the smell of stale beer, cheap cologne, and the sound of hushed conversations. He spotted the contact sitting alone at a corner table. The man was middle-aged, with graying hair and a scar across his left cheek. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room as if expecting trouble. You Hayes? The man asked gruffly as Alexander approached. Yes, Alexander confirmed, taking a seat across from him. I hear you have information. The man leaned in, his voice barely audible over the noise. Caldwell's getting desperate. He knows you're close, and he's planning to take the girl. Alexander's blood ran cold. When? Soon, the man replied, glancing around nervously. He doesn't like loose ends, and you're stirring up too much attention. Alexander's jaw tightened. Why, Lily? What does she have to do with Caldwell? The man hesitated, then spoke slowly. It's not just about her. It's about you. Caldwell believes Lily might be connected to something you want. He thinks she's leverage. Alexander felt a surge of anger. And Emma? What does he know about my daughter? The man's eyes flickered with regret. I don't know for sure, but I heard whispers that she's still alive, kept hidden somewhere. Caldwell's using her as a bargaining chip. The information sent a jolt through Alexander. Could Emma really be alive after all this time? The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. Where is she? He demanded, his voice raw with emotion. I don't know. the man admitted. But there's a house, an old estate outside the city. It's one of Caldwell's hideouts. If she's anywhere, it might be there. Alexander's mind raced. What's the address? The man scribbled something on a napkin and slid it across the table. You didn't get this from me, he warned. Alexander pocketed the napkin, his determination sharper than ever. Thank you. As he stood to leave, the man grabbed his arm. Be careful, Hayes. Caldwell won't play fair. And if Emma's alive, well, she might not be the same person you remember. Alexander nodded, a mixture of hope and dread swirling inside him. I'll be ready. The next morning, Alexander found himself back at the community center, more determined than ever to protect Lily. He approached her with a sense of urgency, knowing the danger was closing in. Lily, he said, kneeling beside her. We might have to leave here for a while. Would you be okay with that? Lily's eyes widened. Where would we go? Somewhere safe, Alexander assured her. Somewhere Caldwell's men can't find us. Lily hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but what if they find us anyway? They won't, Alexander promised, though the fear in his heart was hard to ignore. I won't let them. Later that day, Alexander received another call from Stein. Caldwell's men are moving in, he reported. They're planning to snatch Lily tonight. Alexander's mind raced. We need to get her out now. As he rushed back to the center, his heart pounded with a mix of fear and urgency. He found Janet waiting by the door, her face pale. Mr. Hayes, what's happening? I saw men outside earlier. They looked dangerous. We're leaving, Alexander said quickly, grabbing Lily's hand. It's not safe here. Janet's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded. Be careful. Alexander pulled Lily close as they made their way out the back exit, moving swiftly toward the waiting car. He had hired extra security, and 2 guards flanked them as they rushed into the vehicle. Where are we going? Lily asked, her voice trembling. To a safe place, Alexander replied, his tone firm but kind. We're going to get through this, Lily. I promise. As the car sped through the city streets, Alexander couldn't help but glance at the napkin in his pocket. The address written there was the only clue he had to Emma's possible whereabouts, and possibly the key to unraveling the entire mystery. But as they drove further from the center, he knew that this was only the beginning of the final confrontation. Caldwell was ruthless, and the battle ahead would be dangerous, not just for him, but for Lily and Emma as well. As the city lights blurred into the darkness, Alexander made a silent vow to himself. He would bring his daughter back, no matter the cost. And he would ensure that Lily never faced the same horrors that had haunted Emma. The shadows of the past were closer than ever, but so was the light of hope. And Alexander was ready to face them both, head on. The drive to the safe house was tense and silent. Lily sat beside Alexander, her small hand tightly gripping his, her eyes wide with both fear and trust. It was a precarious moment. Everything Alexander had fought for now hinged on what would happen next. He had promised to protect Lily, and he intended to keep that promise. The safe house was a nondescript building on the outskirts of New York, chosen for its isolation and strong security measures. Stein was already waiting inside when they arrived, flanked by 2 armed guards. He greeted Alexander with a grim nod. You made it just in time, Stein said. Caldwell's men were spotted near the community center after you left. They're searching for you. Alexander led Lily inside, scanning the surroundings to ensure their safety. How long can we stay here? He asked Stein. Long enough to regroup and plan the next move, Stein replied. But you know this isn't over, right? Caldwell won't stop until he gets what he wants. Alexander's eyes were hard, his voice low. Then we'll make sure he doesn't get the chance. After settling Lily in a room filled with books and toys, Alexander and Stein moved to the dimly lit living room, where a large map of the city was spread across the table. Is the estate real? Alexander asked, pointing to the address scrawled on the napkin he had received at the bar. Yes, Stein confirmed. It's heavily guarded, though. If Emma is there, it won't be easy to get her out. Alexander felt a surge of both hope and dread. I don't care how difficult it is. If there's even a chance she's there, I'm going in. Stein looked hesitant. Are you sure, Alexander? This could be a trap. I have to be sure, Alexander insisted, his voice resolute. I can't leave any stone unturned. Not after all this time. Stein nodded. I've arranged for a small team. We'll go in tonight, under the cover of darkness. But you need to be ready for anything. As the hours passed, Alexander returned to Lily's room, finding her curled up on a small cot, clutching one of the books he had given her earlier. She looked up as he entered, her face filled with questions. Are we really safe here? Lily asked, her voice a mix of fear and hope. Yes, Alexander assured her, though the weight of uncertainty lingered in his chest. For now, we're safe. But I need to leave for a while tonight. Lily's eyes widened with panic. No, don't leave me. Alexander knelt beside her, his expression sincere. I have to go, Lily. It's to find someone very important, someone who might be able to help us. Lily's voice trembled. Will you come back? Yes, Alexander promised, his voice firm. I will always come back for you. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, but she nodded, her small face determined. Okay, just be careful. Alexander kissed her forehead gently, a rare show of vulnerability that surprised even him. I will, Lily. I promise. Later that night, Alexander and Stein's team approached Caldwell's estate under the cover of darkness. The massive mansion was surrounded by tall fences, security cameras, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Alexander felt a mix of adrenaline and dread as they prepared to breach the grounds. Stein turned to Alexander, his expression serious. This is it. Are you ready? I've been ready for 10 years, Alexander replied, his voice low and steady. The team moved swiftly and silently, disabling cameras and subduing guards with expert precision. As they reached the main building, Alexander felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He couldn't afford to fail, not now, when he was so close to finding out the truth about Emma. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was tense and eerie. The darkened halls were filled with shadows, and the silence was punctuated only by the faint hum of electronics. Stein led the way, signaling for Alexander to follow closely. Suddenly, a noise came from one of the rooms. Alexander froze, his heart pounding. Stein signaled to his men, who fanned out, checking each room cautiously. Alexander's instincts told him this was it, the moment he had been waiting for. As they reached the final room at the end of the hallway, Alexander felt his breath catch. The door was locked, but Stein's men quickly picked it open. Inside, the dim light revealed a small, sparsely furnished room, and there, sitting on a narrow bed, was a woman. Alexander's heart stopped. The woman was disheveled, her hair tangled, but her face was unmistakable. It was Emma. A wave of emotion surged through him, a mix of disbelief, relief, and overwhelming sorrow. Emma, he whispered, stepping closer. The woman's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition in them. Dad? She asked, her voice hoarse and weak. It's me, Alexander said, his voice breaking. I found you. Emma's face crumpled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. I thought you'd never come. Alexander rushed forward, pulling her into his arms. I'm so sorry, Emma. I never stopped looking for you. Emma sobbed against his chest, her frail body shaking. I tried to escape so many times, but I couldn't. They kept me here. It's over now, Alexander promised, his voice filled with determination. I won't let them hurt you again. Suddenly, a voice broke the moment. Touching reunion, isn't it? Alexander spun around to see Victor Caldwell standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 armed men. His smile was cold and calculating. I knew you'd come, Hayes. You're so predictable. Let her go, Caldwell, Alexander demanded, stepping protectively in front of Emma. Caldwell's expression remained calm. I could, but where's the fun in that? You see, Emma's been very useful to me. And now that you're here, I have both pieces of the puzzle. What do you want, Caldwell? Alexander asked, his voice seething with anger. Simple, Caldwell replied. I want everything you've built, your empire, your assets, your power. In exchange, you get to walk away with your daughter. Alexander's jaw tightened. I won't bargain with you. Caldwell shrugged. Then you leave here empty-handed. Stein, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Not so fast, Caldwell. We've got backup outside, and they're ready to storm this place. Caldwell's face darkened, but he didn't back down. I always knew you'd be a problem, Stein. At that moment, Emma whispered urgently to Alexander. There's a back exit, Dad. We can make it if we're quick. Alexander nodded. Stay close to me. He signaled to Stein's men, and in a swift, coordinated move, they created a diversion. Gunfire erupted, and the room filled with chaos. Alexander grabbed Emma's hand, pulling her toward the back exit. As they sprinted down the dimly lit hallway, Alexander felt a surge of hope. They were so close to escaping, so close to a new beginning. But the sound of footsteps behind them sent a jolt of fear through him. Caldwell's voice rang out. You can't run forever, Hayes. Ignoring the taunt, Alexander pushed forward, guiding Emma toward the exit. As they burst through the door, they were met by Stein's backup team, who quickly ushered them to safety. In the distance, Caldwell's mansion burned with the fire of the gunfight. It was a symbol of the darkness Alexander had fought so hard to overcome. But as he held Emma close, a new realization dawned on him. This was only the beginning. He still had to protect Lily, and he still had to ensure Caldwell could never threaten them again. As they sped away from the burning estate, Alexander looked at Emma, her face streaked with tears and dirt, but filled with a glimmer of hope. We're going home, he said softly, and for the first time in a decade, it felt like the truth. The safe house was quiet in the early morning hours. After the chaotic escape from Caldwell's estate, Alexander, Emma, and Lily finally had a moment to breathe. But the air was still thick with unspoken words, old wounds, and the haunting knowledge that Caldwell wasn't defeated yet. Emma sat at the small kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea that trembled slightly in her hands. She looked older, her eyes reflecting years of hardship, but there was a familiar strength in them, one that Alexander remembered from when she was a child. Are you okay? Alexander asked gently, sitting down across from her. Emma's eyes softened, but her voice was weary. I will be. It's hard to believe this is real. I've dreamed of being free for so long. Alexander reached across the table, taking her hand. I'm so sorry, Emma. I should have found you sooner. Emma shook her head, her grip tightening around his. You never gave up, Dad. That's all that matters. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past 10 years pressing down on them. But there was also a flicker of hope, a promise of healing, even if the road ahead was uncertain. Meanwhile, in the next room, Lily was pacing back and forth, her small face etched with confusion and anxiety. She had heard parts of the confrontation at the estate, but the truth was still a tangled web in her mind. The arrival of Emma, a woman who had been a mystery to her, added a new layer to the uncertainty. Lily's pacing was interrupted when Emma approached her cautiously. Hi, Lily, she said softly. Lily stopped, her eyes wary. Are you really his daughter? Emma nodded slowly, a sad smile on her lips. Yes, I am. And I think we have more in common than you realize. Lily's brow furrowed. Like what? Emma knelt down to Lily's level, her voice gentle. We both know what it's like to be lost and scared, but we also know how to survive. And we both have Alexander in our lives now. He's not perfect, but he's always been trying to protect us. Lily looked down, her voice barely a whisper. I thought I was alone. You're not alone anymore, Emma assured her. None of us are. It was a small moment, but it marked the beginning of a bond. One that would take time to fully form but had the potential to become something real. Alexander watched from a distance, his heart filled with a mix of pride and sorrow. His daughter and this orphan child, both scarred by darkness, were slowly finding their way toward a new kind of family. As the sun rose, Stein arrived with a look of urgency. We've got news, he said, addressing Alexander. Caldwell's gone underground, but he's not finished. He still has powerful connections, and he'll be coming after you. Alexander nodded, his expression resolute. I expected that. What's our next move? Stein hesitated, then spoke firmly. We have enough evidence now to bring Caldwell down, but it will take time. We'll need to protect Emma and Lily until we can ensure their safety. Alexander's gaze was intense. Do it. I don't care what it takes. The following weeks were a blur of legal battles, strategic maneuvers, and tight security measures. Alexander used his resources to push Caldwell's network to the brink, revealing corruption that extended beyond what he had ever imagined. Emma, meanwhile, underwent intense therapy and medical checkups, beginning the slow process of reclaiming her life. Lily, despite her initial fears, began to open up in the safe environment Alexander had created. She and Emma often spent time drawing together, their shared love of art bridging the gap between them. One day, as they sat side by side, Emma handed Lily a small gift. "It's something I found while I was away," Emma explained, her voice filled with emotion. It was the missing heart-shaped locket, now tarnished but still intact. "It's yours." Lily's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the locket. "I thought I lost this forever," she whispered. Emma's smile was warm, though tinged with sadness. "Some things find their way back, even when we think they're gone." Alexander watched from a distance, his heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the end of his battles, but it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild. One evening, as they all sat together for dinner, Lily suddenly spoke up. "Are we a family now?" The question was simple, but it held the weight of everything they had endured. Emma looked at Alexander, who nodded with a smile. "Yes, Lily," he said. "We're a family. A real one." Lily's face broke into a wide grin, and for the first time, the room was filled with genuine laughter. It was a sound Alexander had almost forgotten, but it was a reminder of what he had been fighting for all along. The following morning, Alexander stood on the balcony of the safe house, looking out at the sunrise with Emma by his side. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice filled with both hope and uncertainty. "We start over," Alexander replied. "We build something new, something better." Emma nodded slowly, her gaze distant but filled with a newfound determination. "I want to help you. I want to make things right." "You already have," Alexander assured her, pulling her into a warm embrace. "And we'll do it together." Lily joined them a moment later, her small hand reaching up to hold Alexander's. "Are we going home soon?" she asked. "Yes," Alexander said, his voice filled with certainty. "We're going home." And as the sun continued to rise, Alexander, Emma, and Lily stood together. A family not defined by perfection, but by the strength to survive, heal, and love again. It was a new beginning, not without scars, but filled with hope. And this time, Alexander knew he wouldn't fail.